Hello, Bhawna and Jigar. Thank you so much for following the invitation of GEP's Source newsletter team to participate in this podcast and introducing and discussing the research and development category. Before we jump into it, I would like to introduce both of you to our listeners. Bhawna is a senior consultant based in GEP's India office in Mumbai with 5+ years of consulting and research experience. She has worked on multiple initiatives involving procurement transformation, direct spend management with an emphasis on research and development and laboratory chemicals. She is also a core member of the R&D category advisory group and provides strategic support and guidance to all clients within the agrochemical and physical science industry in research and development to improve their procurement organization, strengthen stakeholder relationships, and strategize on innovative cost reduction initiatives. Jigar is a manager based in GEP's Clark office in New Jersey with over 10 years of management consulting experience in life sciences and research and development. He has led multiple projects involving R&D strategy design, portfolio optimization, market access strategy, direct and indirect spend management with an emphasis on clinical development, medical affairs, chemicals, and biologicals. He is one of the leads of the R&D category advisory group and provides strategic support and guidance to all clients within the agrochemical and physical science industry and R&D to transform procurement organizations, develop resilient supply chains, and support innovative collaboration approaches to mitigate risk. The aim of this podcast would be to discuss the adaptation of procurement to the changing R&D environment accelerated by the disruption caused by COVID-19. We hope to provide an overview of approaches being taken within the R&D procurement function across industries with life sciences and laboratory consumables as examples. On top of all, we would be happy to inspire some of our listeners and create some fruitful takeaways for the audience to discuss this further with their peers, seniors, and any stakeholders you are currently engaging with. Enjoy this podcast and thanks for listening in. So, Bhawna, to take a step back for the audience, what have been some of the key highlights and trends that we are seeing in the R&D space in the recent years?
Thank you, Paul, for having us, and I think it's a great opportunity for our listeners to know about some of the trends we see across R&D, as well as how leaders across the world are responding to the disruption caused by the pandemic. So, as you rightly said, R&D is in the midst of unprecedented change. However, having said that, some of the trends that we see today have been at the forefront since the last 5 years or so, but the emergence of COVID 19 has greatly accelerated the pace at which organizations, big or small, embrace these trends. To call out three of the biggest highlights within this space, the first one has to be patient centricity. Pharma companies are increasingly becoming more purpose driven and empathetic towards patient needs and transforming themselves from being a mere drug provider to an integrated healthcare provider. So, to give you an example of the life sciences space, custom medications has become the key. The demand for low volume, more personalized medications has really shifted the focus away from the historic centralized bulk production to more center driven multi product facilities that are spread regionally or locally. The second big trend we're all seeing is the need for speed at which the product enters the market. Irrespective of the industry we look at, historically research teams have stressed on the importance of new product development. However, sustainable advantage now comes in from the ability to introduce these new products in a more timely fashion. The word on everyone's minds right now is agility. From startups to pharma giants, leaders are striving to inculcate agile traits into their manufacturing abilities to reduce costs as well as accelerate growth strategies. Coming to the third big trend is harnessing digital, such as artificial intelligence and other technologies. Digital tools and health information platforms today have become a lucrative opportunity for pharma companies to fuel their growth. Be it companies deploying in home clinical services or offering remote monitoring as well as data visualization of diagnostics, R&D is going heavy on digital. To put it into perspective for our listeners, the US FDA and other health authorities in China, Korea, Singapore are allowing direct to patient shipments for clinical trial supplies. So to sum it up, digital has changed the way traditional R&D operated, which required both patients and researchers to be present under the same roof. To quote an example here, Paul, Recursion Pharmaceuticals is a digital biology company based in the US that uses AI and automation to test thousands of components on cellular disease models. Isn't that great? Hence, all of these highlights, Paul, that we talked about patient centricity, the need for speed, and digital adoption are a response to changing consumer behavior in several ways, especially the willingness to share data. While these trends started to gain spotlight even before COVID 19 emerged, the pandemic and the subsequent economic downturn has further expedited the pace at which organizations respond to stay competitive in the industry.
That's clear. And how has this evolution impacted the procurement organization's role and objectives? Let's take life sciences R&D as an example.
That's a great question, Paul, and these trends have certainly redefined industry response. Firstly, gone are the days when R&D procurement teams were seen as gatekeepers or mere purchasing functions. Today, they are strategic business partners whose objectives align with the enterprise from the get go. It is a mindset change from a cost reduction mindset to a procurement transformation mindset. And also, in a lot of cases, they are key contributors to new product launches. Early collaboration is key here. Companies today are bringing in procurement leaders with strong research experience who are seen as trusted advisors for the scientist teams, and collaboration begins at an early stage. Second is increasing collaboration with suppliers and pursuing supplier enabled innovation opportunities, thereby also increasing the involvement of procurement in go to market strategies. Innovation can come in from a combination of ideas from within or outside your organization, and suppliers are a great source of these ideas. Substituting year long RFPs with more focused, smaller scale exercises is essential, and procurement professionals today are moving towards simplified sourcing and contracting processes. The suppliers we choose within R&D are not only the biggest cost line but also the greatest source of productivity, risk, and innovation. Therefore, the decisions we make, the KPIs we set for them, and how we manage them must be of absolute importance. And this is where modern day R&D procurement comes in. While traditional approaches primarily focused on buying at the lowest rate, procurement today has broader considerations of innovation and efficiencies. The third response by procurement has been leveraging digital to compete. Data driven platforms and other marketplaces that utilize AI and other technologies for better supply chain visibility and deriving actionable insights. With a digitized core, the number of days it takes to release a product could potentially be reduced from 100 days to less than half. Aggregators such as Scientist.com, Science Exchange are a hallmark in the lab consumables space. These marketplaces are also being heavily utilized by pharma agrochemical companies to manage low volume, high spend requirements, which is one of the inherent challenges in the supply space. Procurement professionals today are also relying on supply chain management tools that can provide forecasts to plan sourcing events at the right time, driven by real time market events and point of sale data. GEP Next has become a one stop solution to address this. It's an AI powered digital supply chain management platform that helps enterprises prepare for and respond to rapidly changing market dynamics. Hence, the role of procurement today, driven by data and analytics, has evolved to a strategic business function that helps organizations make informed decisions in line with enterprise objectives.
Thanks a lot for the insights, Bhawna. So, Jigar, what are some of the key areas with R&D procurement that have been impacted by the emergence of COVID-19?
COVID-19 has had a significant impact within R&D procurement. If you think about it, every stage of R&D development has been impacted. So let's take pharmaceuticals as an example. So preclinical development, clinical development, regulatory, and then launch, all of that, or where each phase has been disrupted because of COVID-19. Let's look at the clinical phase. In the clinical phase, there have been ongoing clinical trials for which CROs have been contracted. Procurement professionals were involved in signing some of those contracts, and now those trials are on hold. There are certain terms and conditions within that. So if you multiply this up across the entire pipeline, it is a significant dollar impact, and in terms of spend as well as in terms of risk. So one of the key areas to focus on is just the R&D pipeline as a whole. What product should be pushed forward? What product should be scaled back? And all of this has to tie into the overall company's approach in terms of dealing with COVID-19 recovery. So at the same time, so that is one area that definitely has had a significant impact. Another area to consider is if there is a manufacturing kind of outlet to the R&D setup. So in the example, let's take a chemical and biological reagents company that supplies chemicals and biologicals for R&D. Their entire revenue stream depends on how much R&D pharma companies, departments within companies will consume. So if you look at this across the board, all of a sudden there's a massive spike in vaccine development, and certain ingredients or chemicals or reagents are running out in short supply. Thus, securing the supply chain is something that procurement functions are scrambling to do, because their eventual customers will demand consistent high quality supply, and there's only so much that of a certain substances that are made in the world. For example, there are certain specific amino acids that are very important in the manufacture of COVID-19 vaccines. These amino acids are in global shortages across the world, and so that gives you an idea of the kind of risk mitigation and reliance on identification, on procurement functions, that is so critical uh, as a response to COVID-19. And finally, just there has been apps because of COVID-19, existing contracts and budgets are completely being reevaluated. So procurement has to work very closely with various functions within the company to explore where can we reduce risk, where can we get savings, where can we tie down suppliers for long-term contracts and accrue the value from the relationship. So all of that is also going on the back end. Another so procurement function teams are involved in negotiations, they're involved in new vendor identification, because now R&D is being pushed as the main outlet by company leadership as an approach to recover from COVID, as an approach to generate revenue from this opportunity that has been created by COVID. So, what can be done to refocus budgets and reallocate to pivot so that we can help with the growth of the company? And procurement functions, especially within R&D, are involved in some of that early thinking, also in some of the execution. So there is a ton of activity that is going on, and procurement is front and center, a highly critical department that is kind of helping in even strategizing as well as executing.
So, Jigar, speaking of securing supply chain, as we recover from COVID-19, what role do you see innovation and technology playing in R&D moving forward?
So innovation and the role of technology to drive that innovation is almost the cornerstone of the COVID-19 recovery effort. And R&D departments are being tasked with to work closely with IT, to work closely with different kind of incubators that are been set up within the company to support senior leadership, to really be the engine that helps the company make the most of the opportunity created by this adversity, which is COVID-19. So let's look at just some areas that we've been hearing about. There is this entire movement of liberating data that has been stored in different systems, different silos. Over the years, IT departments have been the custodians of driving this. Let's upgrade our infrastructure. Let's move to digital. CIOs are kind of driving it, but now it's more like a company-wide situation because of multiple factors. One being the ability to, the whole firm is working remotely, and all of that has caused this need to have end-to-end data visibility and transparency. All those little manual steps that involved somebody pulling something from one system and connecting it onto another spreadsheet. Every firms are looking to automate some of those manual efforts, thus accelerating data transparency, kind of developing that infrastructure to enable this data flow is something that is critical foundation for any innovative approach that any company would like to take. And we're hearing a lot of movement in that space. Companies are bringing in fundamental tools such as GEP Smart that is helping with source to pay and providing that visibility end to end. They're also exploring ERP system implementations. So in general, you're seeing a spike in all of these platform technologies that are being now actioned upon. Budgets are now available for things that were considered, yes, we'll do that later, but now they're being front and center. So that is one thing that we're seeing. And there's also a huge focus on risk mitigation and almost taking a continuous agile approach to risk management and mitigation, making sure that there are dashboards available for very critical product lines, and this kind of update, this visibility, these proactive risk mitigation measures is something that technology is playing a key role in kind of shining a light on the risk, in alerting the right people to take mitigation measures, and also empowering procurement to really critically look at the key product lines, look at all the vulnerabilities. What can we do to build better relationships with suppliers? What can we do to kind of speed some of the qualification and assessment up? So, for example, quality departments are working very closely with procurement, and procurement are finding vendors to conduct video audits. What would have normally done in person now is being done virtually. And so these are just some examples of how necessity is the mother of all invention, right? And what we're also seeing across the board are small players that are using some of these new technologies in very niche areas, emerging as key kind of disruptors. So things that were being done normally are being rethought of. As Bhawna will tell you things about tail spend in marketplaces or aggregation setups in one of our later in the podcast as well. So all of this is creating an ecosystem where there is willingness from the senior most level in the company. There are dollars associated with funding these changes, and there's just this very vibrancy that we're seeing where old companies that were not used to innovating so rapidly are now really pushing innovation and technology adaptation as the cornerstone of COVID-19 recovery. And procurement is also involved in those aspects, in finding these vendors and understanding this marketplace and really delivering value to help with this recovery.
Thanks, Jigar. That makes sense. So, Bhavna, slowly approaching the end, let's talk about mitigation. Let's take laboratory consumables as a key focus area, as it saw a major demand spike over the past 6 months due to increased R&D activity. What can organizations do to mitigate any supply risk as well as optimize their costs?
I think it's important to understand that the demand spike has been driven by direct and indirect effects of the ongoing pandemic. And this actually led to prices of certain supplies skyrocketing to 10 to 15 times of their pre-COVID pricing. Hence, the key word here is to build future resilience. The first approach is to diversify your supply base and develop alternate supply sources, both in terms of geography as well as supplier relationship management. Focus must be towards a center-driven SRM while spreading supply base across geographies and internal stakeholders building these local relationships. Now, where to start? It's important for procurement leaders to become more risk aware. that is comprehensively assessing risks in your supply chain and understanding the supplies that have been most effective and prioritize alternate sources for these. Second is better demand forecasts and partnering with internal and external stakeholders for better supplies allocation. What is important today is to align your supplier base with the demand predictions across various supplies. In situations like the pandemic we are in, where true shortages exist and stakeholder demand is difficult to predict, allocation comes into play. Prioritizing disciplines by strategic importance, margin and revenue will help allocating supplies or services by priority areas. When we talk about external partnerships, many small players have also risen up to expand manufacturing capabilities. Hence, information sharing of such forecasts, capacity, and allocation methodology also helps eliminate supplier anxiety and strengthen those partnerships.
Thanks, Bhavna. As a final message for our listeners, Jigar, according to you, what would be the top 3 priorities for procurement professionals in R&D to consider?
Top 3 priorities procurement professionals should consider, first and foremost, is to proactively mitigate risk to ensure business continuity. Really take a hard look at your key product lines and identify vulnerabilities that were exposed due to COVID. Strengthen those by identifying key strategic vendors who can really help you gain a competitive advantage, as well as help you withstand and mitigate some of the risk caused by events such as this. Secondly, really explore your diversification of your vendor base, because certain geographical diversity is one aspect. Also, kind of bring forward some of those goals that you had set up in procurement, such as having sustainable vendors who align with your company goals, diversity inclusion goals. All of that could be brought in as part of vendor identification, because COVID-19 has kind of almost changed the vendor base a little. So you might as well bring in and accelerate some of those initiatives. So that is another area to think of. And finally, really support and identify proactively areas that you could automate, areas that require greater data transparency, and use technology solutions to give you that advantage. So, for example, in the case of sourcing, like having an end-to-end visibility from all the way from sourcing to payment, for example, using GEP Smart, right? Or using a broader supply chain approach, you could almost go all the way from budget to procure, have things like control towers in place to ensure that you're not your spend is controlled, and you have all the processes kind of that have checks and balances. Also try to automate processes where you can, to use robotic process automation. So really think of a holistic approach to applying technology to improve the various processes involved in procurement. So these would be our 3 top priorities that procurement professionals should think about.
Hey Jigar, thanks for answering the last question of this podcast. We have arrived at the end, and I wanted to thank both of you for taking the time to providing the valuable insights on the category research and development. Stay safe and healthy, both of you, and until next time. Bye-bye.